This meeting is being live streamed.
It is.
Okay. So you really want to know, huh? Fine. I'm going to start by telling you this. Listen up. Your entire life, this one and many others, you've been a god who uses its absolute power to make yourself powerless. Entire cultures, especially this one, have all been afraid of their weaknesses, supposedly, when in reality, they've all been afraid of their power. This goes beyond the matrix of reality. This is something much deeper than that. This is eternal. This is fully realizing your consciousness. This is infinite. This is evolution. This is our divine right.
All right. It is looking super good and glitchy out there. I appreciate it, everybody. Before we get started, I just want to plug a couple of things. I'm excited. I have not done this in a while. I haven't been on a live stream, so it took me a minute, having some technical difficulties, but I have an awesome guest for you all tonight, and I'm really excited. We're going to have an awesome chat. I just want to talk real quick about the content, the contact at the cabin, magic and manifestation. Look how good this website looks. There's still some spots left, but man, it's actually selling out, and I'm really excited. So check that out. It's going to be a lot of fun. 2022 sounded so far away, but I swear to God, it's like right around the corner. I want to say thanks to my friends at Content Safe, making this content available all over the internet, so I don't have to fuck with Bitchute. Pardon my French, but if you've ever tried to upload anything to Bitchute, you know how difficult that is. It's like 5-6 attempts. You know, it's easier to win a spelling contest. I am really excited, folks. We have an amazing guest on the show. Paññobhāsa is going to join us, aka David Reynolds. He has an amazing story. I'm going to let him talk about it, but I've been checking out his content. He does a lot of really cool stuff. The Buddhist for Truth is a kind of a panel, and they talk a lot about Buddhism in the current world. It's a lot of fascinating chats. He's got some books as well. Check those out. I'll post everything in the show notes here, and we'll get with it. Paññobhāsa, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking a few minutes with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure, man. I love what you've been putting out there, and I really am excited to just talk about you and your story, and really what brought you to where you are now, and how all of that happened, because I think it's really rather fascinating.
Oh man, it's kind of a long story. Might have to go back to previous incarnations or something.
Hey, that's totally cool. We're totally fine with that.
Okay. So you want me to commence?
Sure. Start wherever seems like maybe what the catalyst may have been for you as far as seeking, what have you.
All right. Well, usually I start my explanation of how I became a Buddhist monk by just saying that I had a very weird father, and he was very much into experimenting with what he called the occult. You know, doing experiments with like seances and ESP and past life regressions. He was also an amateur hypnotist, so he had a lot of strange stories. He claimed to remember some of his own past lives. He firmly believed in reincarnation, and he considered himself to be a Buddhist, although his Buddhism was pretty sketchy. I learned after I started studying it myself, which is kind of understandable because most of what he learned about Buddhism, he learned from a dead Vietnamese monk being channeled through a spirit medium.
Okay.
So,
yeah. I think my audience is going to be like right on par with this.
Yeah. So, I just, as a kid, I was just kind of, my father liked telling stories, so I'd sit on his lap. And in addition to, World War II stories and this kind of stuff, he'd be talking about astral traveling and like witchcraft and seances. And when I was a kid, we had an old reel-to-reel tape on a tape player, and they recorded a seance. It's kind of like the spooky thing that, as kids you'd listen to. And but even so, I mean, that was just sort of like setting the groundwork for me being able to become a Buddhist monk, being a Westerner who becomes a Buddhist monk. What really, I mean, it just made me open-minded, having the eccentric father and all. But like most people, I think, when I was a little kid, I just assumed that adults know what's what, and that I didn't know what's what because I hadn't grown up yet. And by the time I was about 13, I was starting to have some serious doubts about this theory. And by the time I was 16, it was becoming painfully obvious that the adults were just as clueless as I was. And so I just went into open rebellion. I don't know how many kids go into open rebellion anymore, but it's fairly common back, when I was a kid. And so I just almost flunked out of school and did a lot of partying and really was getting into trouble. And my father, in a towering rage, just told me that I was going to have to see a youth counselor or just like hit the road, essentially. So seeing the youth counselor seemed to be the easier of the two options. So I started seeing this youth counselor who it turned out was a really wise person. And he got me interested in books by Ram Dass. I assume you know who Ram Dass is.
Yeah.
And so I was reading books like Grist for the Mill and The Only Dance There Is and this kind of thing. And I couldn't really understand it because in order to really understand something, you have to be able to integrate it with the rest of your knowledge. You have to kind of make links. Mm-hmm. And it was so alien to anything that I'd been exposed to before that, other than some of my dad's weird stories, but using like all the Sanskrit terms and just getting into like really deep like Hindu and Buddhist philosophy and this sort of thing, Eastern philosophy in general. I couldn't really absorb it very well, but even so, I just intuitively felt that there was something really important there. That was a good alternative to just following the normie route of, swim upstream, spawn and die, or just like party and have lots of fun, and lots of the opposite, just getting lots of trouble. It was like something that you could live your life for, just something that seemed to have real value, something that was worth cultivating. So at around the age of 17, I got this ambition that I was going to renounce the world and become some kind of monk, like some sort of contemplative. And I wasn't really sure what kind yet. I was kind of leaning towards Zen Buddhism, but I, around the age of 20, my mid-20s, I had this schedule that I was going to renounce the world by the age of 30. So I was actually ahead of schedule. I think I was 27 when I finally was ordained as a monk. So I checked out a few places in America. I checked out a Zen place and a Burmese Theravada Buddhist place. And it just seemed really obvious to me that the Theravada Buddhist monastery was coming closer to what the Buddha was teaching. Like the Zen place, it was monks and nuns living together, and they'd put on their layman's clothing and drive to town and buy groceries, and they'd come back and run the little store that sells incense and statues and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And the Theravada place, they were living essentially an ancient lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And that came closer, and it just made sense that if you want to follow what the Buddha taught. And that's really that was my main priority. I mean, I didn't want to become enter a Burmese monastery to become like a Burmese person, or to become like a Burmese monk. I just wanted to understand what the Buddha taught and follow it as well as I could. And so Theravada, because it's still based on ancient India, it comes closer. It's the oldest, most conservative school of Buddhism that's still in existence, arguably. And so I opted for Theravada. And so at the age of 27, I was ordained as a Theravada Buddhist monk at Tampulu Kaba A Monastery in Boulder Creek, California, because I really didn't want to go to a foreign country and just deal with learning new languages and like visa hassles and this kind of a thing. But it turns out that places like ashrams and dharma centers, especially in California, tend to be like shit accelerators. You know, you got a lot of neuroses and this kind of thing just kind of percolating up to the surface, you know, so there's like the shit hitting the fan like on a regular basis. And so I was a monk there for a little over a year and a half, but it was kind of in an uproar. We had a schizophrenic German nun who was insisting that she was enlightened, and we had the monastery attendant was getting strung out on some sort of chemicals, I think, and a lot of the Burmese supporters of the monastery were in open rebellion and trying to take the monastery away from the legal owners of the place, and it was just in this chronic state of uproar. So some of the Burmese monks there advised me to go to Burma for a little while until things got better. So I was thinking maybe 2.5 years or so, but it turned out being over 20 years that I was living in Burma, because things didn't get better, they just got worse, and the monastery just kind of went belly up. But it was really a blessing to be able to go to Burma, because especially then, it's just to a lesser degree now, but at the time, like the early 90s, out in rural Burma, people were still living fairly close to the way they were living in India in the Ganges Valley like 2,500 years ago. They might have rubber flip-flops and a radio and a flashlight, but still it's like the men would take the team of bullocks out into the fields and plow their fields as subsistence farmers, and the teenage girls would take the clay pot balanced on their head and go down to the well or to the river and get water for the hut and this kind of a thing. So it was a really simple, almost primordial kind of lifestyle they were living. And they're devoutly Buddhist. And I tried to live as close as I could to the way the monks were living in the Buddhist time, which it had its limitations. Like in the Buddhist time, monks were wanderers. They didn't really live in one place. They just wandered around and slept under trees, or in if they found some abandoned temple or something, they might spend a few nights there, just wander around. And that just was not allowable for a large, suspicious, conspicuous looking Westerner in a military dictatorship, which it was at the time. So I had to stay in one place, but still I could go out into the forest, and so long as you're within walking distance of a village, because monks aren't allowed to store food, they're not allowed to prepare food for themselves. You just, if you want to eat, you take your bowl in the morning and you walk into the village, and anybody who wants to put food in puts the food in, and then when you get enough, you come back out and you sit down and you eat. And so there's no electricity, no bills really. Life was just really almost free, you could say. And so I tried that for more than 20 years, like I said. Around 2010 or so, I started just burning out on Burma, though. And I just was starting to think that I'd made it about as much progress as I was likely to make following the route that I had taken. And I thought coming back to the West and associating with human beings a little more would be good for me. And it turned out that it was really a challenge. It was just really different. Like American Buddhism and Burmese Buddhism, even though they're both called Theravada Buddhism, it's like night and day. And so it was in Burma, I mean, I was literally worshipped like a god in some places. Some people thought I was like a saint. It was sort of like Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, except without the heads on poles. It's like, and then I come back to America, and after having women spread their scarves on the ground for me to walk on and all this kind of stuff, I come back to the West, and it's like, who is this guy and who does he think he is? Is he wearing this weird brown toga and just like kind of trying to set himself up above everybody else and this kind of a thing. So I actually think I met with more resentment or just sort of scornful looks, cold, hard looks from people inside the Dharma centers than out on the streets of the USA, on a city street. So I was started like going back and forth between America and Burma for several more years. And then finally in December of 2018, I just decided I'm just going to come back to America and stay no matter what, because I was just tired of living in tropical Asia and getting weird diseases and not being able to speak English to other people and just not being able to stop sweating for 7 months out of the year and that kind of a thing. And so I lived at a Burmese monastery in the same tradition that I was ordained in. But Asian monks tend to be not nearly as strict as Western monks, partly because Western monks, in order to become a monk, in order to renounce the world and become a Buddhist monk, you have to pretty much give up everything. You have to go against your family, you lose your friends, all this kind of a thing. So you tend to be more serious about it. Whereas Asian monks, a lot of them, I mean, there are some really saintly ones, but a lot of them, they're not really doing it for spiritual reasons. They just, they want upward social mobility, or they just want to live an easy life in a temple, or they want to get a free education at the monastic schools and this kind of thing, or maybe their family sends them to a monastery when they're little kids because they just got too many mouths to feed, and they're going to get the prestige of having a monk in the family. And so probably most Asian monks really don't have like a spiritual calling. So it was sort of like that at the monastery I was staying at in California. And I just was continuing not to make progress. And so finally, last May, after 30 years of being a monk, being a Mahatera or great elder in the Theravada Buddhist Sangha, I dropped out. And now I'm living in Greenville, South Carolina, and have a job and a girlfriend. And I wear shirts instead of a toga now.
That's cool, man. Well, I am so stoked to be able to hear your story, man. It's so interesting. I've thought about, I mean, like when I had my sort of a spiritual, I would say calling. I think that's a pretty apropos word. I wouldn't mind digging into that a little bit. But, when I started to do that, I thought a lot about, what is Buddhism and being a monk, and do we have to kind of go through this style of life to kind of get to whatever's next, or, a lot of questions. I mean, of course, the typical, just seeking and being super duper curious about things. I would love to kind of dig into that. Like, what would you consider a spiritual calling?
Oh, spiritual calling. I think for starters, it would just be not being satisfied with what most people seem to be satisfied by, just, making money and spending it on, electronics and video games and whatever it is, nice furniture and drapes. And I mean, just that kind of, it's essentially, you start getting an inkling that you're in the Matrix or you're in Plato's cave. I think that would be like the hallmark of spirituality is an awareness that we are living in is really not the highest reality. And there is a way of knowing reality directly without all the thinking getting in the way.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's such a fun, I don't know, and also not so much fun, kind of a quest to, really begin to look within ourselves and start to ask these types of questions, to begin to attempt to know reality. Like there's not a soul on earth that I personally know that can tell me what reality is. I say this shit all the time, but like, it's true. People can give us a model or an idea or their interpretation of what they, perceive reality to be, but it's never the same thing as the direct knowledge of it. It's always just like a signpost. It's always just like a model or a map.
Yeah, the finger pointing at the moon or whatever.
Yeah. And so that's interesting. I'd love to know actually a little bit about because I don't know, I'm not very educated at all about Buddhism. I know very, very little. So I would love to know, what it's like to study Buddhism. Is it more experiential? Are there a lot of texts? Do you have to know certain, scriptures or things like that? What is it like to go down that path?
Well, in Theravada Buddhism, the scriptures are called the Tipitaka, the Pali Tipitaka. And in the Burmese version, there are 40 volumes. So it's like 40 books. And There are some Burmese monks that have memorized all 40 books by heart.
Wow.
And I think that one of them was in the Guinness Book of World Records for just his capacity for rote memorization. But even though Theravada is the oldest and most conservative school of Buddhism, it's still not like pure pristine quotes from the Buddha. You know, there has been some change, and anyone familiar with Christianity knows that, or the history of Christianity, especially the early history, knows that a lot of change. I mean, it just mutated like a virus for at least the first 100 years, you know, and it's sort of the same way with Buddhism. So one of the things that I was doing is I just wanted to know what the Buddha really taught. So you have to sort of dig through it and do like detective work, and you have to use techniques that a lot of Bible scholars invented just for knowing, you know, how likely it is that this is like really, you know, an authentic teaching, you know, or whether it just got cooked up later. But there are some basic texts that really any monk should know, just to be literate in your tradition. But it's truth is something that you have to learn through your own experience. That like you were saying earlier, it's Dharma or Dhamma is like a map, and you have to follow the map. And it's sort of like, you know, if somebody's never tasted vanilla before, let's say they come from out in the sticks, or, you know, some remote Burmese village or something, they ask you, what does vanilla taste like? I mean, you can't explain. I mean, you could sit there and talk and talk and talk. You could have a Nobel Prize in chemistry, and you got your Nobel Prize by studying how people taste vanilla, you know, just all the sense receptors, you know, and the interaction with the organic molecules of the vanilla and how it goes into the brain and its process and everything. You can know all of that, and still you absolutely cannot explain to someone what vanilla tastes like. And so really, it's like the Dharma or Buddhism originally, anyway, it was just instructions on how to find yourself some vanilla and taste it, because you can't really explain reality. You can like give techniques or like a way of life that makes it more likely that you're going to get insights into the nature of reality. But you really can't learn it from books. And so the books are kind of limited. They can teach you meditation techniques, and for monks, you know, it teaches them the rules of monastic discipline, and, you know, how to bake a bowl and how to sew their robes and that kind of a thing. But for understanding reality, it's just a lifestyle that is more conducive, mainly just through being so neutral and like quiet. Because most people, you know, they're just like sailing stormy seas or on a roller coaster ride. You know, you're living in the West, especially, just all these distractions and flashing lights and everything that they just, you know, they're just so distracted by all the commotion going on that they really can't get insight into, you know, the underlying essence of everything. You know, they're distracted by all the forms, and they have no concept at all of the underlying essence or substance of reality. So yeah, I mean, there are a few books, the Sutta Nipata or the Dhammapada, the Majjhima Nikaya, something like that would be good for a person to read, just so that they'd have some literacy in Buddhist philosophy, and, you know, just what is and is not Buddhism. But really, it's based on practice.
Yeah, that's great. I have a few questions in the chat. Do you mind if I just cherry pick a couple?
Go for it.
Let's see. My friends asked, do we have to physically detach in order to spiritually detach from our possessions?
It's not absolutely necessary, although it does help. It makes it easier. If you detach, if you renounce the world, or, you know, you're living in a state of utter simplicity, just like a hut or a cave with bare walls, and you don't have all these things distracting you. You don't have a mate who's, you know, wanting to discuss that, you know, the furniture or something, and or just distracting you with her body or that kind of a thing. You know, it's like just live just this sort of plain neutral kind of existence where you're avoiding pleasure and pain pretty much, to the extent that, it's convenient to, I mean, you can't totally avoid pleasure and pain, but still, you just live a life that keeps everything down to a minimum and is just stripped down human existence. And then because you're not all distracted, you're not using up your mental energy to, to figure out how to work the remote control of the new cell phone or whatever, that, there's more stillness. And that's really where insight comes from, is stillness. Mm. So you cultivate stillness, and it's usually easier if you renounce the world. But I think in the West, really renouncing the world is problematic, because you can't really live like an ancient Indian Buddhist monk. That's something I learned the hard way, really. So wow. There's going to have to be some sort of compromise or Dharma bum situation or something like that.
Right. That's great, man. I think that's a really good answer.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah.
Yeah. So living in the West is like a higher difficulty setting. It's like you're playing the video game at like advanced level and trying to win. Whereas being a monk or a renunciant, it's like, it's turning down the difficulty level so that, you're able to win more easily. But some people, if it's too easy, it's just kind of boring. And I think there are some people who really prosper under the hard difficulty setting. Mm-hmm. And in the West, it does seem that most of the people who have a reputation for being awakened beings tend to be lay people. And I think most of them are even married. So it is possible.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great answer. Another question is, what's the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism, in your opinion?
The higher up you go, the closer together they become, and they've been very deeply influenced each other, because they both were Indian systems, and they both evolved side by side in India for more than 2,000 years. So there's a lot of similarity, and the Buddha did use a lot of just basic Brahmanistic Indian terminology. But the main difference is Buddhism is much less like deity oriented. It acknowledges the existence of beings that are higher than us on the scale of things, but you don't worship them, and they don't have any power to send you to heaven or hell. They're just minding their own business. They don't really care much about us. Also, there's the whole concept of like the soul or God, the highest reality. And you have to choose a dualistic extreme in order to even talk about it. You have to say it exists or it doesn't exist. There is a God or there isn't, or we have a soul, an eternal soul, or we don't have an eternal soul. But you're still stuck in dualism. You're still stuck in concepts. And so I don't have much use for the philosopher Hegel, but one thing that he said that really struck me is he starts his dialectic and his logic as pure being. That's like the first thesis of his whole dialectic, is pure being. And then in Hegel's dialectic, then you have the antithesis that kind of nullifies and cancels out the thesis. And so his antithesis is pure non-being. And then he points out that pure being and pure non-being are so utterly devoid of any kind of distinguishable content that they just kind of merge into each other, and you can't really tell them apart. So then you need the synthesis, which is some kind of distinction, some sort of contrast between existence and non-existence, in order to have, the 10,000 things, the multiplicity of the world. And so in getting back to Buddhism and Hinduism, Buddhism, it pretty much just goes with isn't, whereas Hinduism just goes with is. And it's really, I mean, they're just interchangeable, really, because neither one of them is completely valid. You can't really explain highest truth with is or isn't. It's just completely off the scale. You can't read it in a book. That's kind of what we were touching on earlier. You can't explain reality in a book. You can't just say, well, it's like this, or, we do have an eternal soul that has these properties or whatever. It's just, you just kind of messed it up by even trying to put it into words. So yeah, I mean, you can say is or isn't, and really they're just kind of equally invalid, but you have to use something in order to talk about it, because that's just the way, the human mind works. And so Hinduism and most theistic, well, probably all theistic religions, monotheistic ones, just go with is. There is a God, there is an eternal soul. Buddhism, it just kind of goes the other way, takes the other alternative and says there isn't like a highest eternal God, and there isn't like an eternal soul. But really, this people who are just locked in duality will just say, oh, Buddhists are just nihilists. They say that nothing really exists, but it's deeper than that. It's just you're getting into what cannot be expressed in words, and so you don't even try.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's funny. I have a friend who's like writing a book, and he was telling a friend of his about it. And he was like, dude, you just shouldn't do that. He's like, dude, just don't write the book, because like you're just confusing. All this more vernacular. It's just more thing, it's just like, it gets more and more confusing, was his point. And I think he was saying it almost in jest too, because it's a good model. Like I think he has a great idea and it makes sense. And I encourage him to write the book, but it also makes sense to withdraw from that and not put out more noise on top of noise on top of noise, that, like you said, it's almost better left, unsaid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are some things that are worth saying, and like wise spiritual books do help people. And then of course, books on how to make jam is really important for people who want to make jam, that kind of thing.
For sure. Another question is, do you have any thoughts on what is potential versus what is actualized? I'm not sure I 100% understand the question. I think
potential and actualized.
I think what he's trying to say is like maybe dream world versus physical world, immaterial versus material, potentially.
Yeah, well, potential, I mean, that's just sort of like yeah, man, that's a tough one. I mean, like, I took physics in college, so I know the difference between potential energy and like kinetic energy. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the question entails. So like in a lot of contexts, potential is really just a way of masking our own ignorance. It's like, well, if you hadn't done that, then this would have happened, but you really don't know.
No, you don't.
So you can say, well, somebody had the potential to do this, and they just didn't do it. But I mean, that's just a way of saying, maybe he did, or you think probably he did, or something like that. But it's a way of kind of masking one's own ignorance of what the actual case is. But yeah, maybe, yeah, it's hard to say. Maybe he could clarify the question.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I would say there's like infinite potential. What is actualized is like what we choose, and I don't know, or at least that's how I'm interpreting sort of what's being asked, but I'm not 100% sure. If you want to refine that a little bit, happy to repitch it. I want to ask a little bit about how your father's influences may have affected you, or what similarities maybe in the sort of woo-woo or whatever you want to call, mystical type of experiences may have translated or been similar. What similarities or differences even have you noticed within Buddhism and I guess the esoteric?
Well, my father, he apparently had better psychic ability than I do. I'm really not very talented with regard to psychic abilities. If anything remotely psychic happens in my life, it's like spontaneous and beyond my conscious control. Just weird coincidences, that kind of a thing can happen. Synchronicity, that kind of thing. But pretty obviously, I was pretty profoundly influenced by my father, and he was convinced that I was a reincarnation of his father. So my father believed me to be my own grandfather, but I don't remember being my own grandfather, so I can't really say. Um, yeah, he believed more easily than I do. I mean, a lot of people who saw me, as a Buddhist monk wearing the brown toga and everything might be skeptical of me being like a critically thinking, skeptical kind of a person, but I'm not really driven by faith so much. I've got more of a scientific temperament or than an artistic one, I guess. Or in Buddhism, they talk about the faith temperament and the understanding temperament. And so I really want to, try to think clearly. And if there are multiple options for explaining something, I would like to consider all of the options instead of just seizing upon, my favorite one, or, just the first one that pops up, which is what a lot of people do. So, yeah, the occult, as my father called it, it's has a lot of similarities with like New Age. And so you have a lot of really credulous people who are just really jump at and believe things pretty easily. Whereas in Buddhism, especially really ancient Buddhism, there was the idea that you just shouldn't believe anything. And it wasn't skepticism like the ancient Greek skeptics where they're saying you can't know the truth. It's just that in Buddhism, you can know the truth, but you're not going to know it by thinking about it. You just have to experience it directly through what essentially it would be mysticism. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
Oh, it was really interesting, actually. I love the idea of the faith temperament versus the understanding temperament. I see that a lot. I see a lot of people who are very sheepish and willing to basically believe whatever. And then I see people, I think, that are maybe too skeptical too. I think they're, it's a balance. But I love that. I love that model. That really is cool. And I love the don't believe anything too. I'm a big fan of that. One of my favorite writers ever was Robert Anton Wilson. And that was one of his quotes was like, I don't believe anything, but I have my suspicions.
Yeah. Yeah. In Buddhist philosophy, they do say you have to balance faith and understanding, because if you have too much faith, you're just going to believe anything, no matter how ridiculous it is. But if you have too much of the understanding temperament, then you're going to be so skeptical, nobody can tell you anything.
Yeah.
So just having a balance of the two is good. And I used to tell people that I really don't have much faith, but then they point out that I was living in Burma in a cave wearing a robe. So obviously I had faith in something.
That's really good. Well, cool. Another question. Thanks. Let's see. If you could impart on others one thing that you learned from your 30 years of renunciation, what would it be?
Whenever you're unhappy, it's because you desire something. That's the second noble truth. And most people, like, they're unhappy, they just want to blame somebody else, or they want to blame the weather, or whatever. But really, it's always volitional. Suffering or unhappiness is always volitional. It's just that we're such automatons to some degree. I mean, we're just creatures of habit. We just follow our conditioning, and we don't realize that we always have the choice of being unhappy or not. You just accept the situation. Doesn't matter what it is. If you accept it, it's not a problem. But most people just have this habit of, when the dog's barking at 3 a.m, they get upset, they just start, blaming the stupid dog or whatever. And yeah, that would be like one of the most important things, is that whenever you're unhappy, it's because you want something. And sometimes if you might be unhappy, just think, what is it that I want? And you might realize that it's something completely stupid. Like, you wanted to go outside and do something and it's pouring down rain. So you're just like depressed, or you're unhappy, you're grumbling. And you just remind yourself, I mean, all the grumbling in the world isn't going to make it stop raining. It's just completely wasted unhappiness. You just accept that it's raining. There's nothing you can do about it. So I'll just do something inside, and the problem is solved. But overcoming your own conditioning, I mean, a lifetime of conditioning, or in Buddhism, maybe many lifetimes of conditioning, this habitual reactions to things that you don't, just without being fully awake, you just follow along. as like a slave to this autopilot that's running you. So yeah, that would be the most important thing, I would say.
Man, that's great. And I appreciate that. Yeah, the whole reincarnation thing, that's been coming up a lot with me lately, and past life regressions and people's names like there's a Dolores Cannon, and there was another couple books that some friends of mine had recommended me. I don't know why it's been coming up a fair bit. Have you ever done any sort of regression work or anything like that?
No, I haven't. I mean, just my father would tell me stories when I was a kid about his past lives, but I have like intuitive, like I don't know if you call them hypotheses, but I do have certain like personality traits that are difficult to explain through genetics or past experience. You know, just like a fascination for certain periods of history, or there's lots of things like that. You know, like I think it's possible that I could have been like a corrupt Catholic monk in like 14th century England, and you know, I like wrote manuscripts, you know, like I copied books by hand for a living because they hadn't invented the printing press yet, and despised the French, and probably died of bubonic plague, this kind of thing. But it's more of just guessing, because I really have never undergone like a really vivid past life regression. So I have like theories, or you know, just ideas, but I can't really say.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I can't either. I haven't ever trodden down that path, but you know, I'm who knows? I may do that if I can find somebody who I trust, you know, to do something like that. For
Yeah.
somebody who's just kind of maybe starting out learning, when they want to learn about themselves, they want to learn what the Buddha taught, and how would you advise them to begin their path?
If they want to begin their path, you might try like a meditation retreat, even just a weekend one for beginners, or like the Goenka people, they do 10-day retreats, and just sitting there without moving, with your eyes closed, watching your breath or watching your mind. I mean, that can really be a crash course in just how out of control of your own mind you are. You know, it's just going everywhere. You know, it's just, some people just, I mean, they can just start going nuts, just trying to just sit still and just kind of be aware of the touch sensation of air as going in and out of their nose. You know, it's like within just a short time, some people they can really crack up. Most people don't, but still, it's like you really get this crash course. A lot of people do, just in how out of control of your own mind you are, and just the difficulty, the burden of just sitting there quietly. You know, people are. It's like the habit of just being active and running around in circles all the time. It's very difficult to overcome that at first. And reading books is a good way of getting an initial idea. That's how I did it. You know, reading Ram Dass books that my youth counselor gave to me.
That's so cool, man. I'm a big fan of Ram Dass.
Yeah, or a lot of people, they start off just with like psychedelics or something.
Sure.
Yeah, they'll have like these really profound experiences with LSD or mushrooms or something, and then you know, you have like a mystical experience where you're absolutely certain that this experience is at least as real as my ordinary waking state of consciousness, and then they'll try to find some way of reproducing that without the chemicals. Like that's how Ram Dass pretty much started off, and yeah, meditation can be that way. I mean, I mean, it shouldn't really be a substitute for acid, but you know, you can have profound mystical experiences through meditation that can be similar to an acid trip, except without the like the psychedelic colors and so forth.
That's cool. Yeah, that was actually my next question. I was going to ask if you had any, you know, extra sensational sort of mystical experiences through meditation as well.
By nature, I've always been a bad meditator. And it's just my mind is very restless and like hyperactive. In Pali, in like Theravada Buddhist philosophy. It's called kukucha, which is just the restlessness and agitation of the mind. But I really tried really hard, and over years of just grinding away at it, I've had a few relatively profound experiences. Like there was one time for several months where I could just sit down in meditation and just be just empty. It's like your mind is just silent and clear like glass. It's not like blank. You're not unconscious. You're actually more conscious than if you're thinking. So yeah, I've had experiences like that.
That sounds cool. That sounds like just like a clarity, like a calm, maybe knowing. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
There may be.
I mean, you could call it like an approach to just pure consciousness. That it's like consciousness devoid of any particular content, which would be sort of like a mystical experience.
So it sounds to me like, and not to bring drugs more into this, but like an experience with like ecstasy or something like that, where you really feel maybe just like more aware and your mind is calm, but it's also, like, I don't know. And that's just glimpses from probably college. But I think a lot of people do have really profound experiences with drugs
Yeah.
that lead them into this type of work. So I certainly don't want to dismiss that. Also, I will say, not medical advice, you know what I'm saying? Right.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody's advocating anything. But I think that's really, really powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think in my generation, most of the Western monks that I met started off that way, with taking like psychedelics and then trying to find some way of creating that without relying on the chemicals. Just the lucidity and the clarity and the expanded consciousness and that sort of thing.
I think, yeah, we realize that it's possible, and we get a glimpse into something where we know that there's a better state or a higher level of consciousness or some sort of thing that we could maybe perhaps exist from. And by catching that whiff, it like, yeah, it just maybe brings us in. I can't imagine where I'd be without, some of those experiences, even just pot, like when I was like young, like maybe 15 or 16 years old,
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, you experience a kind of reality that's just as valid as the normal waking state. And so in a way you can triangulate, you can kind of look at things from at least two different angles, and it adds more depth to your experience, I think.
Yeah.
Or it can, unless people are just using it to just party and escape from their life or something.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think whatever it is that you're doing, intention is really important.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's amazing. I really appreciate you sharing all this. And I know you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom. I would love to perhaps, catch up again sometime and get a little bit deeper into some of the ideas and some of the things that you've learned. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you're doing. Yeah, somebody said in the chat, he has written some books. I've got a link I just put in the chat. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. You've written 3 books, right?
Yeah. So far.
I've got 3. I've got the one link in the chat right now. I'll put the other 3. I'll put all Paññobhāsa's links in the description box below. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, you're watching this on YouTube, wherever, you have access to those links. I have his YouTube link in the description currently, so that'll go out and be available for everybody.
It's available on Amazon.
Yep. Amazon.
Plugging my book.
Yeah, dude, do it.
The first one.
It looks great. I love the cover.
Yeah, my sweetheart drew that. It's the Burning Monk. That's pretty much my trademark.
Punk rock, man. I fucking love it. Pardon my French. I don't mean to be cursy necessarily, but
it's all right. Your show.
Well, I appreciate it. I just want to say thank you again. And if there's anything I can do to help you out, I'm more than happy to. Much love from just only a state away. And I definitely will keep in touch. I'd love to catch up again soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody out there. Be sure to give Paññobhāsa's channel a click. It's the very first link in the description of this video. Do that. If you're in the chat, click on the link I put up there for the Amazon for the book. And I'll put all the links in the show notes. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for liking, sharing this video. Rate the podcast, and we'll see y'all soon. Much, much, much love. Peace out, everybody.